Well, hello, I am Laura Marino.
And I'm Jessica Sweeney. Laura, it is so great to be back on stage with you. We agreed we would let everybody know first why they should be interested in hearing us have a conversation with each other. I think one of the most fun things is that you and I met at a Women in Product conference. You were giving a talk about navigating the teenage years, and we connected on how much I needed you to come and give that presentation to my leadership team. And I was doing some coaching, and you said I should come and do some training for your leadership team. And a great friendship from there was born. You're a wonderful coach to product leaders. I know you've lectured on product management at Stanford and at your alma mater in Bogota. And part of what I've really appreciated is how much you lift up other women in product, both through conferences like this one, but also as a board member of leading women in technology. So one of the best things I've ever gotten out of a Women in Product conference is meeting you and all of the work we've been able to do together since then.
Jessica, it's so great to be on the stage with you again. As you mentioned, we met, oh my God, years ago in Women in Product, and we've stayed friends forever. And one of the reasons is I was very attracted to you because, first of all, we have a lot in common. We both have been leading product teams for over 20 years in B2B and B2B2C. We both love teaching, but I especially found very attractive how generous you are with sharing your knowledge and how much you have contributed to really pushing the product management community forward, being the lead instructor for the product management program at UC San Diego, founding um, product camp in San Diego, starting the product management track in the San Diego Startup Week. And now that you are advising CEOs and founders of young and growing startups on how to be product leaders, I think that it just shows how much you are willing to share your knowledge. So with that, let's get going. We want to share a lot of what we know about B2B. And as you and I have discussed multiple times, many of those well known product management best practices that evolved around B2C are much, much harder to apply in B2B. In particular, this quick design, deliver, measure, and learn feedback loop that is so well known in B2C, it's really difficult to apply in B2B because the buyer and the users are not the same persona, because you don't have that large volume of customers, and because it's really hard, especially for enterprise customers, to adopt new functionality and new innovation quickly. So, given that challenge, what have you done in your experience to really create an effective feedback loop with your customers?
Yeah, it really came into focus for me when I was at Elsevier, which is a big scientific and academic publisher. Uh, Anyone who's been in science probably has heard of them. Most of our customers are academic and research institutions, which meant that we really had one time of the year when we could release new versions of our product. So that consumer model of quick releases every sprint, just didn't work for us. We were in big, big trouble if we made changes that affected the user interface between the cycle of deployment that our customer could accommodate. Part of what we had to understand was the enormous rollout and documentation and training infrastructure within those institutions to get the product in the hands of the scientists who needed to use them. So part of what we have to do in B2B is really understand what does it take outside of our walls to get the product in the hands of our users. Now, this also gives us an opportunity we can take advantage of. So at Limelight Health, we had these big whale customers, hence the name of the talk, where actually we only had whale customers. They were big, influential, multi-billion dollar companies. And they had to make an investment in rolling out new versions of the product. So there was a different dynamic we were able to create with them. They became invested in our innovation cycle, and we included them in that. So instead of that learn, build, release cycle, we instead brought our big customers into our innovation cycle on the inside. We could partner with our customers who thought of them as visionaries. So, as product leaders, we have the opportunity to drive an attitude within our companies that we're not just selling to these companies, but we're actually creating a partnership with them. So, we could bring customers in for design sprints and bring them into the inside of that innovation cycle.
It's interesting that even in B2B2C, where you think that the B2C side of the house can be much more nimble in terms of experimenting, there are challenges because in B2B2C, you still have those big customers as your main paying customers. I'm the CPO at TrueML. We are in the least sexy area of fintech because what we're doing is reinventing how we go about debt collection. So our clients are big banks, big buy now, pay later companies that place their defaulted debts with us. And then we reach out through modern interfaces, digital media to the consumers to help them start paying back those debts. And we do a lot of the quick sort of experimentation with what works for those consumers. But in many cases, we actually have to go back to the clients and confirm if they are okay for us to present new things to the consumers, because in reality, those are their customers. So you have that additional level of iteration with checking with your customers whether it's okay for you to iterate and bring innovation to those consumers. The other piece, and I think that you and I have talked about this, is the importance of managing those big customers.
Yes, so they can exert this outsized influence on what you're building. It's almost the dark side of B2B. You've got these wonderful customers that you can partner with, but those whales every once in a while become problematic in the way that it pulls you off course. So, Laura, how have you dealt with that?
So I had to deal with those problematic, big, opinionated customers in many of my companies. And I do have some tips and some strategies that have worked for me that I wanted to share. For example, in one of my companies, we sold software to the largest law firms in the US, UK, Australia, and Canada. And you can imagine that every single one of those law firms felt that they were the most important customer that we had. And each of them wanted to tell us what we should be putting on the roadmap and what we should be prioritizing. And what we found that worked really well was to bring those law firms to customer councils where we could bring peer companies together, law firms that respected each other. These were primarily the leaders of the risk side of those law firms. So we would bring them together. We would share with them what we were seeing in the market, what we were focusing on, and then we would ask them to tell us what was most important to them. And it was very interesting to see a law firm that had been pounding their fist saying, you absolutely need to build this into the product, realize that their peers didn't care at all about that functionality. So it was a very effective way for them to realize that we were not building a product just for each of them individually, that we were building a product that was meant to serve the entire market.
Right. So you get customer A to tell customer B that the thing they're asking for wasn't that important.
Exactly. And it's a lot more effective than you as the product leader saying, no, you can't have that.
Now, Laura, sometimes you do have to take it a step further, though, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Yes. And you know the story. It is probably one of those rites of passage for a chief product officer. But in another one of the companies that I worked for, as I was even interviewing to come into the company, I started hearing about this concern with a very big whale, a big logo customer that was asking for a lot of custom development. I heard a lot of concern primarily from the engineering side, but across the board, there was this awareness that, hey, this logo customer that sales was so excited about, because of course it was a name brand that everybody recognized, but they wanted so much custom development. They wanted the product to essentially operate differently for them. So when I joined as chief product officer, the first thing I did is I worked with the engineering team and the product team to quantify how much bandwidth of product and engineering was actually going on to build stuff for this customer and build functionality that was not going to be reusable. And we found that 18% of all of the effort from product and engineering was going towards that customer. So with that data, I was able to go to the executive team, and we had a very tough conversation with the executive team. Now, the other executives knew that there was a problem. They all knew that, yes, this was a very demanding customer. But it wasn't until they saw the actual data that we, as an executive team, were able to make the very tough decision to essentially fire the customer. And the executive in charge of that part of the business had to go and tell them that we love you dearly, but we are not aligned in what we're trying to do, and therefore we're going to have to part ways. And it is very difficult, and hopefully you don't have to do that a lot. But what we realized is that if we were to land another whale like that, that expected that amount of custom development, we were going to become a custom development shop and not a product company anymore.
And as you say, it does feel a bit like a rite of passage. I have had the experience of breaking up with a customer, as we might say. I think there is a middle ground. Um, Although, we have to acknowledge you're not really in charge until you get to make the unpleasant decisions. But let's find an alternate approach that we might use, because you only get to do that maybe once or twice before you have to keep some customers, right? So at Limelight Health, we were building software for insurance companies. And as I said before, every company we served was a multi-billion-dollar operation. So they all felt they were most important. They all felt their customers had to come first. So, we couldn't fire them because it turns out they were all our customers. So the way that we addressed that, we had a mantra within the product development team that we were sales-led in sequencing and market-driven in scope. So what that meant was that we did allow the contracts that we closed to drive the sequence of solutions on our roadmap. But we were rigorous in the design of those solutions to meet a broader product need within the marketplace as a whole. So that was the compromise that we found. And it wasn't perfect. It took a huge amount of work on the part of the product managers and the leaders on the team. But it reinforced one of the ideas that is core to product management, which is understanding the problem that we're solving really clearly before we start to deliver the solution. So if a customer comes to us and says, I need this solution, we needed to zoom out from that and say, what is the problem that we're solving? Who else has that problem? And how can we deliver maybe not exactly the solution that customer is asking for the way that they've asked for it to be designed, but a solution that will meet their needs as well as the needs of other customers. So, yeah.
I love this concept of customer-led in timing and market-led in scope. Because there is a reality that when you're in B2B, you really need to partner with your sales team. You want that sales team to be successful. You want them to be able to sell to those large customers. But it can be very dangerous if you allow the sales team to go out there and start promising things that you don't want to build in the product because they are not valuable for the market in general. So I have a lot of experiences of kind of good and bad experiences with working with a sales team. But tell me a little bit first about how you were dealing with the sales team to really get to that partnership where you can support them, but make sure that they are not promising unreasonable things to close that next deal.
Yeah. I'll try and give some really specific strategies that people can use. So, those of you watching, we want to give you something you can do tomorrow morning when you go back into the office. What can you actually do? Part of what I did in working with the sales team was to help them be more successful as a salesperson. So I didn't try to get them to care about product or product strategy or our development cycles. I showed how we cared about them as a salesperson, and our work was going to help them be more successful. And especially in enterprise software, these are not one and done relationships. The sales team makes their bonus on those relationships growing over time, which means that they need to be there in future when their promises come due. So by bringing the product team into that sales relationship and that sales cycle, we're helping the sales team make their quota, make more money. And that was one of the keys to achieving that. Uh, so the other thing that we did was to be actively engaged in that sales cycle. In particular, what we did was a roadmap tour. So any of you product managers out there who have roadmap slides in the hands of your sales team, I will encourage you on the down low, hack into their computers, please, and delete all copies. At least try to keep them out of their hands. And the reason for that was that we implemented a very strict policy that I presented the roadmap, or when I got too busy, I had a brilliant director of product who was able to do that. And I was certain to be available at a moment's notice, so I was never not available to the sales team. And what that did was made sure that I was building a relationship with that customer from the very beginning, and that all of the nuances of what we were delivering and how we were delivering and that innovation program that I talked about earlier got conveyed to the customer in the way that I felt would be most effective. So we began building that relationship. We began building that inclusion in the innovation program even before the contract was signed.
That is so important because it is true that sometimes sales needs to be able to present what is the future that's going to be coming. But if you're not working with them very closely, it can be very dangerous. In one of my companies, again, when we were selling to these large law firms, we launched a brand new product. And that product already had several big competitors in the market. And for us to be able to penetrate the market with the new product, we had to move very quickly to meet what the competitors had and then start showing differentiation. So what ended up happening is we would go into some of those existing customers to upsell them to the new product, but they would say, well, I still want to see this functionality or that functionality that we didn't have at the time. So we had to agree to commit to things that we would deliver 3 months later or 6 months later. But it only worked when product was directly involved in those conversations as the sales team was working with those customers. Because guess what? We would celebrate, yes, we did close the big deal with this big law firm. And guess what? The next thing is 3 months later, they're coming and saying, you promised, and it is in the contract. So we absolutely had to make sure that we were evaluating what we had committed. We were looking, first of all, that we would only commit to things that we knew we wanted in the product. We were not going to commit to things that were one-offs for any of those law firms, but that we also had to see how much we could commit. I mean, we had a roadmap and there was only so much we could put in the roadmap. So it really becomes a very, very critical partnership between product and sales. And this is something that people in B2C don't really need to think too much about, but it's absolutely critical when you're in B2B and in enterprise B2B. So, Jessica, we've talked a lot about sales. Sales is a big, big stakeholder when you are in B2B. But actually, there are a lot of other stakeholders. And if you are in a complex industry, in a highly regulated industry, there's also the consideration about not only other stakeholders like legal, but domain experts. So, let's talk a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, one of the big myths of product management, I think, is the assumption that a domain expert is an excellent product manager. And we get this a lot in enterprise software, especially because we've got these big whale customers who have a lot of domain expertise, and there is some movement of staff from those large companies into the vendors that serve them. So if you're selling to train operators like I did at Lili Systems up in San Jose, what I heard was what you really need to do is hire some train operators to come and be your product managers because they understand the market. And you and I have talked about this lots. It fails more often than not because the key to being a really excellent product manager is knowing how to ask the right questions and set aside assumptions. And that doesn't always go with that market expertise. I will say it's not impossible to have happen. I've had examples of brilliant domain expertise folks who also had what it took to become a really great product manager. So at Limelight, we were building systems for actuaries. I worked with Alex, who was an actuary, and there was something I saw in him that made me think he's actually got the ability to learn the craft. But the key for anyone who is bringing in those subject matter experts is that you must not neglect their training as a product manager. So they need to learn the craft in addition to the understanding of the market that they bring in the door. What I'm looking for is hiring for that innate curiosity, that willingness to set aside what someone thinks they already know and ask questions about how things are today or how things might be different from their own experience in the market. So I won't say it can't be done, but there's always a lot of pressure and it is difficult to do.
Yes, I've had both experiences, good and bad ones with that. I think that in addition to that curiosity that you mentioned, it's also very important for that person to be able to extrapolate beyond the one customer that they're talking to what the market needs. When in one of the companies, we had this guy who was a domain expert in the legal industry. He had been with law firms for a long time, and we tried to bring him in as a product manager. And he failed because he was very much a consultant. He would talk to one company and come back and say, we need to build this exactly as they asked for. And we said, no, no, no. You need to step back. You need to really be able to synthesize what the market needs. So he actually failed as a product manager, but then we moved him to be sort of a domain expert that was a consultant to the product organization. And that worked really well. The product managers were able to bounce ideas through him, get to deeper details of how things might need to work. But he was not the one really making the decisions of what we would be focusing on. So I do say domain expertise is very important, and it is a mistake for people coming from product and tech to not realize how much they do need to learn and how much they do need to rely on domain experts that will accelerate their learning. But I agree with you. Don't assume that those domain experts necessarily are going to be the product managers that you need in your team.
And you've outlined a wonderful relationship that you can create with those folks, which is to have them in the evangelist role, to have them as resources that are available for the sales team. And I think that sets up a best of both worlds kind of relationship.
That's correct. And you need to have a great relationship, not just with those domain experts, but with other stakeholders. For example, we work now in fintech and in debt collection, very, very highly regulated industry. So my team works constantly with the legal team because we really need to run a lot of the things, a lot of our ideas by them before we can actually even experiment with them. So that partnership becomes very, very important. And again, the more regulated your industry is, the more complex it is, the more you need to partner with those other stakeholders who are the experts.
And Laura, how do you think about the role of the subject matter experts or the product team in disruption?
Oh, yes. Well, again, you really need to figure out that to disrupt an industry, you probably cannot hire as product managers people from inside that industry. In our case, again, we're disrupting the way that debt collection is done. And I can promise you, I could not find a product manager that I could bring from inside the traditional debt collection industry. So, what I do is I bring people from the technology space that understand innovation, that understand the concept of experimenting. And then I make sure that they learn from those experts that have been in the industry for 20 or 30 years. But yes, you cannot disrupt an industry from inside. You need to bring people who can look from the outside what needs to change.
And partner them with the folks who understand the industry really tightly. So that theme of partnership really runs through everything we're talking about. I'll note I could talk with you for hours. It's always a pleasure. We are going to run short on time. So I want to just ask you, Laura, for all of the product managers and product leaders who are watching this, what is the most important thought that you want to leave them with?
I would say B2B is very complex, is very exciting as well. And you need to be looking at your stakeholders, you need to be looking at the strategies that have been popularized in B2C and see what applies. But really keep in mind that you are in a very different world. And I'm looking forward to having the opportunity to answer questions that I'm sure we get after the session, but really make sure that you understand the perspective from your customers, from your stakeholders, before trying to apply a lot of what's been written for product management. What about you, Jessica? What would be the main message?
I think I would expand on that idea of partnership. So, as a head of product, chief product officer, or product leader, I find it's vitally important that I reorient any of my relationships with customers, with prospects, with the sales team, with my industry experts, to think of them as extensions of the product function that I'm responsible for getting the product in the hands of the buyers and the users. So my success criteria as a product leader is delivering that successful product to market. I can't do that without the sales team. I can't do that without the buyers that I'm partnered with. And so, anytime there's a hint of an adversarial relationship with these different stakeholders, with those whales that are putting so much pressure on my team, I'm looking for ways to reorient that into a win-win relationship. And that really involves understanding how we all get successful together and helping everybody to understand that.
Well, we're looking forward to interacting with you, answering questions. So join us for the live session. And again, we have many, many more lessons that we can share with all of you.
Yeah, try and stop us. Laura, thank you so much. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Jessica. Just a pleasure as usual.